Eloise Harper felt the contented slackening of her shoulders the moment the River Belle left its mooring and glided toward the lavender horizon. She had promised her co-workers at the Maple Bridge Public Library that she would do nothing more mentally strenuous than decide between a paperback and a glass of rosé on this 4-night gastronomy and gorges cruise. The low hum of the engine, the swish of water against the hull, and the scent of fresh dill drifting from the galley convinced her she had chosen the perfect retreat. The greatest lure of the cruise, and the reason it had sold out within an hour, was Chef Laurent Duval, a culinary celebrity whose 5-course dinners were said to evoke childhood memories people never knew they had. Rumour credited the magic to a proprietary spice blend, one he guarded as jealously as a dragon's hoard. Passengers joked that he probably slept with it under his pillow. Whether that was exaggeration or not, everyone looked forward to the first sunset dinner service, scheduled for night 2, when the blend would make its only appearance in a legendary bouillabaisse. On the second evening, Eloise secured a spot at the rail of the top-deck terrace, ideal for the pre-dinner cocktail hour. River birches lined the banks, their leaves shimmering like coins. Strings of Edison bulbs blinked to life overhead as a jazz duo tuned their instruments. Eloise sipped a citrus spritz, eyes half closed with bliss, until an unexpected hush rippled through the gathering. Chef Duval strode onto the deck, petite but commanding in a crisp white jacket embroidered with his name in gold thread. In his hands he carried a small brass box the size of a cigar case. He raised it as if it were a chalice. "Mesdames et messieurs," he announced, French accent curling around each word. "Within this box rests the heart of tonight's dinner, the blend my great-grand-mère created in Marseille. I show it to you now so that later, when you taste its essence, you will recall this perfect sunset." Applause followed, and phones came out for photos, but Duval, half smiling, tucked the box under his arm and returned to the galley, trailed by his ruby-haired sous-chef Martha. Conversation resumed, though several passengers speculated in low tones that if the recipe was as valuable as gossip claimed, a safer vessel than the River Belle might have been prudent. Dinner began at precisely 7. Eloise, seated near a panoramic window with 3 strangers, retired botanist Mrs. Pringle, deckhand-turned-server Jonah Reed, and honeymooner Kayla Morris, admired the candlelit linen and polished copper flatware. The first 2 courses arrived flawlessly. Then came the main event. Porcelain bowls of saffron-orange bouillabaisse crowned with prawns and wisps of fennel. Eloise inhaled. The aroma seemed orchestral. Lemony brightness, smoky whisper, peppery snap, all harmonizing. She took one ecstatic spoonful, and the overhead lights flickered, extinguished, then reignited. Conversation dipped, rose, and proceeded. Yet a moment later, an anguished cry echoed from the galley. The dining room quieted again. Chef Duval burst through the swinging doors, face drained of colour. "Someone has stolen the blend," he exclaimed. His hand shook as he held aloft the now open brass box, empty save for a few golden grains. Gasps erupted. The captain, a barrel-chested man named Rupert McKinnon, strode forward to corral panic. "Remain seated, folks," Captain Rupert urged, voice steady as river rock. "We'll look into this straight away." Eloise set down her spoon, pulse quickening. A vanishing spice wouldn't normally merit an investigation, but the sudden tension prickled like sleet. She had solved the occasional mystery back at the library, missing rare first editions and such, and old habits stirred. Within minutes, Captain Rupert convinced Chef Duval to close the galley, postponing remaining courses until the jar was found. Passengers received complimentary sherry in consolation, but unease fluttered through the room like trapped moths. Finally, the captain approached Eloise's table, cap in hand. "Miss Harper, isn't it?" he asked. "Marta tells me you have a head for puzzles. Frankly, I could use one. Small vessel, limited personnel, yet that blend's disappeared." Eloise blinked. "I'm hardly a detective, Captain." "You're the nearest thing aboard," he replied with a weary smile. "If you'd be willing, I'd appreciate fresh eyes." So much for a worry-free vacation, Eloise thought, but she heard herself agree. The library board would be tickled. They convened in the observation lounge, a semicircular room smelling faintly of teak oil and nutmeg from earlier mulled cider. Present were Chef Duval, sous chef Marta, server Jonah, bartender Noah, food blogger Mrs. Pringle, and Kayla's husband Logan, who had been taking sunset photos near the galley when the spice went missing. The captain introduced Eloise as an informal consultant. No one objected, though Chef Duval's look suggested skepticism. Eloise began. "Let's establish timing. Chef, when did you last see the blend?" Duval placed the empty box on a low table with reverence. "At 6:45. I unlocked the box, withdrew 2 spoonfuls for the bouillabaisse base, then returned it to my station." At 6:50, lights flickered. In that confusion, I stepped away, perhaps 20 seconds, to reset the breaker just beyond the pantry. When I looked again, the box had been opened and the jar inside was gone. "Anyone else in the galley?" Eloise asked. "Marta and Jonah plating starters," Duval said. He offered them a sharp glance. "No passengers allowed back there at that time." Marta twisted her linen apron. "I was filleting sea bass the entire time." "Jonah?" Jonah squared his shoulders. "I was whisking the rouille. My hands were coated in pepper oil. I couldn't have pocketed a jar without being noticed." Eloise turned to Mrs. Pringle, silver hair in a tidy bun. "You were at my table. Did you leave during the flicker?" "Only to fetch my shawl, drafty near the window. I returned before the soup arrived." Logan lifted his camera. "I'd gone to the stern deck to photograph the sun dropping behind the ridge. Caught that power dip on film." He frowned. "Not that film exists anymore." Noah, the bartender, leaned on the doorframe. "Breaker boxes are near the staff stairs. I went down a level to check refrigerator gauges. Captain's orders. Didn't meet a soul." Eloise noted each statement. For a small room, the galley has several exits. Main door to dining room, side door to pantry corridor, hatch to the deck. "Any unlocked?" "All but the deck hatch," Duval said. "Too heavy." "And the jar, a single container," Eloise clarified. "A tiny porcelain pot, cobalt blue," Duval replied. "Inscribed Étoile, my great-grandmother's name." The captain excused the group but requested they stay accessible. As they left, Eloise caught a whiff of something exotic, warm yet citrusy. She couldn't place it, but it lingered in the observation lounge after Mrs. Pringle exited. Eloise began her quiet rounds. First stop, the galley. Stainless surfaces gleamed beneath strip lights. At the center rested the brass box. Inside, residue the color of turmeric. Beside it lay a tasting spoon with a smear of orange oil. She sniffed. Yes, same elusive aroma she'd sensed moments ago. She examined the breaker panel. A single switch bore a sticky orange fingerprint. Interesting. Jonah had said his hands were coated in pepper oil. The print suggested someone with oily fingers had toggled the breaker, perhaps intentionally to create darkness. In the pantry corridor, she found a narrow porthole cracked open, bringing in cool evening air. On the sill were 3 granules, golden flecks against white paint. Could the thief have tossed the jar outside, planning to retrieve it later from the riverbank? Risky, yet possible. Next, Eloise knocked on Jonah's cabin door. He opened wearing a t-shirt, apron removed, bare forearms marked by tiny burns earned in kitchen combat. A faint whiff of smoked paprika clung to him. "Mind if I ask a few more questions?" she said. "Go ahead." "Why would someone cut the lights?" "To cause a distraction," he replied instantly. Eyeballs shift, hands move. "Did you adjust the breaker?" He shook his head. "Too busy with the roue, but I did touch the panel earlier setting the fryer temp. My gloves were off." That could explain the print, Eloise conceded. Yet Jonah's candour earned him a tentative asterisk, not a checkmark. Next she sought Marta in the crew mess. The sous chef sat at a metal table, nursing chamomile tea. "It's all my fault," Marta murmured when Eloise sat opposite. "I told Chef our supply of Espelette pepper was low, so he fetched the blend early. If I hadn't—" "You can't blame yourself for theft," Eloise said gently, noting Marta's quivering hands. On the left index finger, a small band-aid dotted with saffron orange, cut from fishbone perhaps, but the hue matched the spice. "May I ask how long you've worked with Chef Duval?" 6 years, Marta said. "I trained at his Paris bistro. Everyone thinks he's a genius, and he is, but I help develop recipes. He's never once credited me publicly." She shrugged. "Still, I respect him. I wouldn't sabotage tonight." Eloise believed the emotion, but simmering resentment could brew bold acts. Back in the lounge, Eloise found Mrs. Pringle reading a field guide to edible flowers. "I always travel with references," the botanist said. "You never know when a chef will misuse a marigold." Eloise smiled. "I noticed a distinct fragrance when you left earlier." "Ah." Mrs. Pringle lifted her silk scarf, ivory with indigo stars. "I dabbed a bit of allspice oil on the fringe. Good for motion sickness." Eloise sniffed. Similar top note, yet not identical. She tucked the detail away. At 10 p.m, Captain Rupert called an informal meeting. Anxiety had curdled into frustration. Passengers wanted dessert, not detective work. Eloise requested 1 more hour. She felt the solution hovering like a dragonfly just out of reach. She returned to the porthole in the pantry corridor, opened it wider, and leaned outside. The river shone like melted pewter, current brisk. Retrieving a porcelain jar from the water in darkness would be folly, so tossing it overboard seemed unlikely. But what if the jar hadn't left the ship? She imagined being the thief, needing to hide a palm-sized container quickly. Where? Her gaze fell on a stack of galvanized bins labeled compost. Eloise donned kitchen gloves, lifted the lid. Onion skins, shrimp shells, herb stems, and there, nestled like a robin's egg, a cobalt blue pot, star emblem faint beneath coating of carrot peel. She exhaled a shaky laugh, equal parts triumph and relief. Why hide the jar in compost rather than keep it? Unless the goal wasn't to steal but to pause its use, prevent the chef from adding it to additional dishes, perhaps to expose him. But expose him as what? A plagiarist? Unlikely. Then a new possibility dawned. Could the thief have hoped the blend would spoil irreparably in damp compost? If Chef Duval couldn't fulfill his promises, his reputation would suffer. Who stood to gain? Eloise wiped the pot and returned to the lounge with the captain. Marta, Jonah, Mrs. Pringle, Noah, and Logan were summoned again. When Chef Duval entered and saw the jar in Eloise's hands, he pressed fingers to lips, eyes wet. "It was in the compost," Eloise announced. placed there purposely. But someone miscalculated. I found it before moisture seeped through the cork. She paced. We have two key clues: the circuit breaker smear and the compost bin hiding place. Both point to someone comfortable in the galley. That narrows us to Marta and Jonah. Yet motive matters. Jonah hopes to rise under Chef Duval. Tarnishing the chef helps him little. Marta, however, confessed frustration at being overlooked. Marta's cheeks flamed. I didn't steal it. Perhaps not alone, Eloise continued. Another element is the allspice aroma near Mrs. Pringle. Not identical to the blend, but similar enough that, in dim lighting, someone might misattribute scents. Mrs. Pringle stiffened. Are you accusing me? No, Eloise said softly. I believe you were a decoy. Someone smeared a trace of the blend on your scarf during the darkness, drawing potential sniffers toward you while they hid the jar. A person who handles aromatic ingredients daily and who stood nearest you in the dining room. She turned to Marta. During service, you delivered our soup bowls. You brushed past Mrs. Pringle then. The power flickered moments later. Chef stepped away. You slipped back to the galley, extinguished the breaker, lifted the jar, dabbed spice on the scarf in passing, and buried the pot in compost, knowing it might ruin overnight. Your bandaged finger is stained orange, not from fish, but from the blend. Silence. Marta stared at her bandage, as if it belonged to someone else. Finally, she whispered, I only wanted him to stop lying. Eloise tilted her head. Lying? Marta swallowed hard. The blend isn't his great-grandmother's. It's mine, my recipe. I developed it years ago during staff meals. He claimed it, spun a family legend, and locked it away. Tonight I planned to destroy the jar so he'd have to admit the truth. A collective murmur rose. Chef Duval's gaze hardened. You exaggerate. You refined an existing mix, nothing more. Name the ingredients, Marta challenged, all 12 in order of weight. Duval opened his mouth, closed it. His silence was louder than any confession. Captain Rupert cleared his throat. Regardless of culinary authorship, theft is theft. Marta lowered her head. I accept responsibility, but my motives weren't greed. Eloise spoke gently. Chef, perhaps the most elegant solution is acknowledgement rather than punishment. Credit your collaborator, and the matter ends tonight. Press charges, and the story becomes public scandal. Duval considered, fingers drumming the brass box. Finally, he sighed. Marta, I apologize. Tomorrow's brunch menu will list Duval and Villalobos' signature blend, and we will discuss partnership shares when we dock. Marta's shoulders sagged with relief. Tears glistened. Eloise exhaled, tension draining. Then the jar remains with the chef, Captain Rupert concluded. No need to involve authorities. Miss Harper, you've saved our voyage from sour aftertaste. The group dispersed. Before leaving, Jonah clasped Eloise's hand. Library work must be exciting, she laughed. Only when spices vanish. Later that night, the river bell floated beneath a quilt of stars. Eloise stood at the rail, savouring the crisp air, and from the galley vent, the scent of the reclaimed blend simmering in stock. Chef Duval and Marta's voices mingled in amiable debate about coriander ratios. In the lounge, Mrs. Pringle narrated edible flower trivia to enthralled honeymooners. Peace unfurled like steam from a teacup. Eloise smiled at the river's ribboning reflection. She would return to Maple Bridge with tales far spicier than any book club selection, proof that even librarians on holiday can stir up a bit of mystery when the recipe calls for it.